Hello, welcome to Today in Eve Online, September 9th. Well, the CSM Summit just wrapped up. We covered that yesterday on Talking in Station's Sunday show. And now we're looking around to see what else happened. Friday, a lot of things happened all while we were on air. And I'll just review that really quick. There was the September patch notes that came out, and those patch notes are coming tomorrow. Those changes are coming tomorrow. The patch notes detailed those changes. The monthly economic report came out, and that showed us pretty much what we knew. There was some interesting information. Again, we covered that on Talking Station Sunday. Check out that podcast or YouTube video. And then there was the security report, which had the biggest news, and that was the absolutely huge number of bots that had been discovered and destroyed. So check that out. Again, that was covered on Talking Station Sunday as well. Hanging out with me today is Lux Scindere. Cinder, isn't it?
However you want to say it.
How do you say that?
I think it was Scindere, but...
Scindere? Yeah. Sounds good. Okay, I was thinking back, and yesterday was like over a 2-hour show. It was a bit long because there was a tiny bit of filler. I went and cut some stuff out, but that was really just mostly me filling, so I took that out. But the show was still like 2 hours and 17 minutes. It was just so dense yesterday on all the things that had happened. I think the big takeaway, though, I don't know, Lux, you haven't watched that show yet, have you?
No.
All right, then I'll tell you, and I'll tell the audience, that one of the big takeaways was the economics for, I guess, ratting in nullsec was really bad in that it had dropped considerably. It dropped from, I think it was 5 trillion, what was it, down to 3 or something? It was pretty big. And then I'm just trying to think of all the things I heard, because there's a lot of information coming out from different sources talking about the numbers and how bad or not bad they were, or not as surprisingly bad as they thought. And what I kind of gathered was that the Imperium did better than most because they were equipped to do most. They were equipped to be resilient, but that everybody, including the Imperium, went down considerably, at least 1/3 or 2/3 the amount they had done before. Or no, that's a different stat. So the overall impression is the chaos or the blackout has really done a good job of suppressing that massive income that was being generated. What do you think, Lux?
I mean, it's as other people point out, there are ways that you might be able to reduce that income without hemorrhaging players. I think that's the most interesting discussion that's been had around it. Like, is it worth it? And I think it's only going to be worth it if it takes the game into a better state than it's currently in. And that's an open question for everyone.
Yeah. That was kind of what the CSM were. When you asked them what they think about the summit, they were like, well, I think there was two things. One is there was some optimism of like, okay, CCP does know what they are seeing. Their statistics, I think, probably changed some minds on CSM. Like they saw the statistics that CCP had, and they weren't nearly as dire as the PCU reports. Let's take a look at that, actually, PCU. And that you can catch that at Eve-offline. And Tranquility is the name of the server. I used to always get that wrong. I just thought like, well, it's only one server. Where's the Eve server? What's this Tranquility thing? And people used to always talk about, what was it? They wouldn't call it Tranquility. They'd call it something else, like Trank or something.
I always feel like they're named around the wrong ways. Like CC should be Tranquility, and the main server should be Singularity.
Yeah, the test server, it's peaceful and quiet. That should be tranquility. Yeah, they misnamed those. All right, so I think the only way to look at the numbers is to get some kind of perspective. And by doing that, you have to increase the scale so you can see the uh, um, the historic patterns to see where you should be. And these statistics are always weird. You can compare today to yesterday and say, oh, we're worse off today than we were yesterday. But you're comparing a Monday to a Sunday, which is completely different. And then you can say, well, let's compare today to a week ago. And that's fine. But then you get into seasonality. You know, are we in this? Or actually, when you start comparing months to 6 months ago, you start getting into seasonality. Like, is it winter? Is it summer? Is there a normal natural slump? When you're doing it week by week, I guess you could do that. Anyway, the point is that statistics totally depend, interpretation of statistics depend on context. So you see this massive spike here that got us up to 50,000 players. That was, you would think, a good thing, but that was when the game went free to play, essentially, in late 2016. And of course, there's going to be a huge spike. You want to see a huge spike because, and this is something I was told at the time, you want to see that spike be as tall as possible because it's only going to drift down back to normal. And that was Noisy Gamer that said that, and he was exactly right. It drifted back down to normal, and within, I would say, a year, it was back to where it was before. One of the sad things about this is when you have that kind of curiosity, you, some Ashterothi says a lot, you bring in players that are looking around to see what this game's all about. They come in and they see, shrug their shoulders and decide it's not for them, and then they take off, and those are now ex-players, and they're not coming back.
Yeah. Although you do see those threads on Reddit quite frequently. Like there's at least one a week where it's someone saying, oh yeah, I tried the game out, I played it for a bit, but I didn't really get into it, but I've come back to try it again. But you do see those on Reddit.
Yeah. And that's, then there are the people that do come back and check it out again because there's enough calling to them to do that. And those people, sometimes it takes 3 or 4 or 5 times for them to try it and for it to stick, they say. And then once you get Eve, you're like plugged in and on your way. But one of the problems is they need something to call them back. They need something that's new, that's changed, that's exciting, or they need friends telling them, yeah, try it again. I don't actually think that works as well as seeing some advertising that says, that complicated game that you tried and it was too difficult. Well, it's got this new thing. And then they might, say, I want to try that new thing. Maybe it's a little easier. So CCP knows that, and they've been trying to make the new player experience something that's more intuitive. Gets in the game needs to get out of the way so that people can start the career climb. And by getting out of the way, we mean the kind of thing that prevents a player from even enjoying the content. For instance, we were talking about this yesterday, getting stuck on an asteroid after you've hit warp. If you start bumping an asteroid, you could be there indefinitely. And they've already initiated their action. So they don't know what to do. And they just think this game is broken. And then they take off.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the fix to that in the next patch, which is the 3-minute timer. And it has a visual indicator as well. It's not a hidden mechanic like many of the mechanics in it.
Right. And that was something that threw me off too, was when I would get bumped and I would see my thrust like going up, climbing up, and then going all the way back down, and then climbing up and then going all the way back down. And I was just like, this thing is crazy. So it wasn't until I became more experienced I realized, like, oh, okay, there's some things going on, but none of that is communicated to new people until now. So this next patch will have a little a little graphic at the bottom that will show you when you're getting to the ability to warp, and that might help out. Okay. So that's it. Those are the PCU numbers. They look down, of course. That is not unexpected. And they just had a massive amount of bans, so it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. We'll keep an eye on it. Takes a while to figure out patterns. So yesterday, right before we went on air, was it yesterday? This huge fight where Test basically got jumped by Marshy and Bomber's Bar. Actually, it was Goons. I don't know who initiated it. I think Goons said it was initiated by Marshy, and Marshy is hunting in that area. Basically, there's a ton of activity through wormholes. That's the big doctrine right now. Wormholes and stealth bombers. And I think people are having a pretty good time that are doing that. And people who are the subject of those bombs are probably not having a good time. Let's move over to this video I wanted to show you. This is really good stuff from Setonia. And this is about Thera. It's called Everything You Need to Know About Thera. And it's made by Setonia. It's published on the 5th. And we're going to take a look at it now so we can talk about it.
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Hey, I'm Setonia, and this is my guide to the Thera system. Thera is one of the most unique systems in EVE Online, home to brave explorers, daring raiders, and nomadic PvP organizations. Just like wormhole systems, Thera is only accessible by wormhole connections. There are no stargates connecting it to known space, so if you want to visit Thera, you'll have to find one of the random connections. Unlike regular wormholes though, Thera has 4 NPC stations belonging to the Sisters of Eve faction that any player is able to dock in and use, making it very accessible. Every station also has a full range of services including market, manufacturing, research, and even clone-based services, so you can make Thera your home station and leave a jump clone behind that you can jump to from any location, which is not possible in regular wormhole space. Thera also has another set of very special rules governing it. Unlike in nullsec and wormhole space, it's impossible to anchor any type of structure, such as citadels or a player-owned starbase, so players living in Thera will have to make do with the NPC stations. It's also impossible to anchor any type of deployable bubbles or mobile warp disruptors in Thera. Thera is also unique in its size too. Thera is the largest system in the game, spanning over 200 astronomical units from the sun to the furthest planet, and if you warp from one station to the other, you can potentially have a warp that is further than 300 AU, which would take well over 3 minutes for a battleship. All of these special rules make it almost impossible for any one group or organization in the game to lock down Thera for themselves. So how do you get to Thera? Well, as I mentioned, the connections linking Pharaoh are completely random. There is, however, an excellent community website called evescout.com that posts and lists connections from Pharaoh. The website does seem a little slow these days though, so if you're someone who loves doing exploration, I'd recommend getting in touch with EveScout because they do pay players from the pool of donations that they get to list connections on their website. So how many wormholes connections does Thera normally have? Well, just like normal wormholes, Thera actually has static connections. A static wormhole is a wormhole that is always present in the system. If it collapses or expires, it will always be replaced by a wormhole of the same type. Thera has a large amount of static wormholes, vastly more than any other wormhole system in the game. Thera has 2 high-sec statics, 2 low-sec statics, and 3 null-sec static connections, which means it will always be well connected to the rest of the EVE universe. In addition to all that, Thera also has a significantly higher chance than any other system to have a dynamic wormhole connection spawning. As a result, it's quite common to see Thera have over 20 different wormholes present at any one time. Thera is a great base for exploration thanks to the NPC stations, guaranteed route back to higher-sec from the 2 high-sec statics, and a selection of null-sec and wormhole space connections. It's really desirable for explorers who want to get the best rewards in wormhole and deep null-sec space without having to go through the gate camps of null-sec or deal with wormhole connections from high-secs which are more often camped or contested. You can set your clone in Thera, go out while it's quiet, collect some loot, head back to Thera, then store it in Thera until a good high-sec connection is available, or you can just take it back home straight away. Thera is very flexible and offers a lot of options to people who just want to do exploration content in Eve. Thera is a great way to get loot out from NPC nullsec or lowsec to highsec without having to risk flying through the more dangerous areas of nullsec and lowsec. If you have some loot that you have from a dangerous area of space you no longer have access to, you can use Thera as a shortcut to hopefully avoid gate camps, which tend to be in choke points or the entry systems, rather than deep in nullsec. This can save you a lot of ISK and jump freighter fees, or a lot of time if you planned on getting your stuff out eventually yourself. Just a word of advice, I'd recommend avoiding the nearest jitter hole or the Paleo Cybernetic station in Thera, which is the top station, or the second station because it's actually on the same grid as the Paleo Cybernetic station. The group I'm in, We Form Volta, often have the station camped, and the nearest jitter hole is also a popular hole for people to camp too. If you want to make it in and out of Thera safely, I'd recommend using the Gravitation Laboratory station, which is the third one down in the list, which is where most neutral players base out of. The station with the least amount of players docked in it and the least likely station to be camped is the Fullerin Loom, which is the bottom station. Just be aware that the Loom station is a semi-kickout, so if you're not paying attention you can drift off the undock quite quickly and be an easy kill. Thera offers a lot to players interested in PvP too. The easy logistics from the high sec holes means it's easy to bring in PvP ships without as much hassle as living in a dedicated wormhole system brings. You also have the NPC stations, and being able to set your clone directly in Thera means you don't have to worry about evictions or being putted out of your wormhole and spending time getting back to the wormhole so you can resume PvPing again. Thera always has 3 nullsec and 2 lowsec wormholes, so you'll usually have at least one connection that's great for PvP. You can always roll undesirable holes too, which is what organized groups like We Form Volta and Bombers Bar do. Coming from a wormhole allows your group to literally appear from thin air, hopefully catching some juicy targets in an ambush before the alliance they belong to are able to respond with overwhelming force. Thera also has some surprising ISK making opportunities too. Thera has the same combat sites that can spawn in a C3 wormhole, however, it's probably a bad idea to run the super anomalies in Thera. Thera can spawn gas sites that spawn in high-end wormholes too, which can be very lucrative, especially if you have an opportunity to ninja mine them before anyone else, so that you can mine for 30 minutes before any sleepers spawn. Thera also has nullsec relic and data sites, just like low-class wormholes can, and it also has access to many rare ores and ice mining. So that's everything to know about Thera. It can be a convenient shortcut, a haven for exploration, or a base for launching attacks on the other residents of New Eden from. Whatever you plan to use Thera for, I hope that this video helped you see the potential that Thera can bring to your gameplay in Eve, whatever that may be. Thanks for watching.
Well, heard some Talking in Stations theme music in there at the end.
Yeah.
That's really neat. That's such good stuff. Really, really wish we had time to produce more evergreen content like that. But until we do, there's Suetonia and other people like Jintan and whoever else making these things that you can refer to later on. You don't have to catch it like today's news.
Yeah, it's just a great resource, and it's especially good because you watch it and you think, you know what, and I'm going to jump in an Astro and go and do something in there.
Yeah. That's what's been calling me lately is and I think you too, right? You were in nullsec a lot and you're kind of hanging out in highsec.
Oh yeah. Just like there's stuff going on with the invasions, and it's like, oh, what if they change this time? Let's go try it.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I have plenty of friends in nullsec, and it just my heart's not in that kind of gameplay. It hasn't been for a long time. This blackout thing is the only thing that's kind of like, maybe I'll stick around. But now I feel like it's the action's really in high sec. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, and like these wormholes, they just let you get around and try things much more readily as well.
You mean in Thera or in general?
Thera particularly, but in general as well.
Mm-hmm. So Cheetah there is asking us, Thera is just a wormhole version of Thunderdome. It depends on how you use Thera. You can. It is any wormhole is considered lawless space, so you can just do whatever you want. Thera has some limitations, as was just explained, that make it a little different than even a typical wormhole. But I haven't been there when it's been kind of like a gladiator ring where people just kind of park in one of those stations and fight. That I haven't had that experience. So it could be a Thunderdome, which is basically an arena where a lot of people gather just to have fights with no political aims. But yeah, speaking of political aims, just about finished with an article that I'm writing again. I talked about it yesterday. I'm going to give it to INN to have them publish it if they want to. If not, I'll publish it. And one of the conclusions is that I come to, it's not a conclusion, but one of the things that I think about, and I'll throw this out to you, Lux. A lot of the criticism is that the Eve meets make everybody friends, and so nobody wants to fight anybody after that. And that's kind of a logical thing to think, but I was thinking it's not really that the old leaders make friends and don't want to fight as much as it is that those guys are still the old leaders. Like the leadership doesn't have a churn to it. And without that, you don't have the opportunity for people to grow past a certain point. It's like people are kind of sitting on these thrones around New Eden. With the exception of Elise Randolph, who stepped off Pandemic Legions and allowed somebody else to come up.
I mean, bitterness and hostility aren't the only reasons to fight in Eve. I mean, listening to the Wormhole was speaking the other day about their version of Bushido sounded really, really cool.
Yeah.
But there are other reasons to fight too. It's like, is it more beneficial to set up like a little cabal between the people in OSEC and like monopolize things, or is it better to actually interrupt and destroy your economic rival? And at the moment, people seem to have come to the conclusion that it's better to sort of work together in various ways to set up monopolies than to destroy their rival, which might not be that feasible.
Right. Well, there was a time when alliances would come and go often because people would want to break off and do their own thing, and other people would want to take what they've built and hand it to a group that could better organize it. Which is what happened to Iron Armada recently. They built something and they thought, well, we're tired and we can't seem to just keep giving these guys activity, so we're going to take our group and move them into a place that can take care of them. It's kind of like giving your puppy away after you've had it for a few years. Kind of sad. But there are definitely a lot of reasons to fight. I think that one of the things that I keep pointing to is that those reasons have diminished over time, and I think long before Blackout. And I think Hilmar's view is we got to make things worth fighting for. But right now, nothing's worth fighting for because everybody's so happy and safe. Like, why would you fight?
It's also a matter of, can you fight? I mean, when you look at some of the sovereignty mechanics and just how long it takes to take down a structure, and then you look at the number of structures, it's an appalling a wall of effort that you would need to scale to actually fight an established nullsec alliance at the moment. Like, no one looks at that and says, "Oh, that'll be fun. Let's spend the next 5 years doing timers on structures." No one looks at that and says, "What? That looks like a lot of fun. Let's do that." Yeah, there might be someone actually. We should get them on the show. We can interview them.
Ashterothi just joined us. I don't know if he's able to talk, but he's in here. But yeah, I think after the show yesterday, we had a nice talk for hours and hours and hours in this channel or in these channels, talking about the game and some of the stuff. It was very interesting, I thought. But one of the things that stuck with me was, look, Eve nullsec has been on a decline for a long time. It wasn't just this blackout thing. I think it was the value. I think the reasons to fight are not good enough. And this is not new. People will say this, but I think I have thought about it for different reasons. It's not that you guys, can roam around and have, because I think people say like, yeah, you can be friends and fight still. And I've heard that too, but none of those fights go beyond, let's have some giggles, let's have some excitement, some fun. And then when those fights are over, you can look around and say like, hey, we did a great job, or, oh, we really got trashed. You can, have some fun with it.
Or even to look at it and say that was really significant.
That's what you're missing.
Yeah, I think so.
That's what you're missing, and that's why I think it's been on decline. That isn't significant. That fight wasn't significant. And I wonder, is that a issue of we're not celebrating fights enough? Like we keep only wanting to talk about this strata that's easy to understand. We're not going into the smaller day-to-day and saying, hey, this little fight, it was meaningful to these guys because they're fighting over this one system that sits between them. Like we're not really exploring that.
Hi.
Hey, Ash.
You require push to talk.
Oh, do I? Let's see. Let me take that away. Well, how's it going, Ash? Push to talk for now. Oh, wait.
You muted him again.
Did I mute Ash?
No, it's fine. No, I did it. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good.
Yeah, I think that part of it is it's the same as faction warfare, right? Like, if all you do is like money is it. If that is your only judgment, then that means that only specific things will be valued.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to that old meme of already replaced. Like, I remember a time where when you destroyed the enemy's fleet, like you dealt them a serious blow, even without attacking their infrastructure.
Well, that's the thing. The idea in EVE Online is that, for the people who are in nullsec, who want that gameplay of trying to be the spoiler and dominate somebody, or trying to take away something they want, this is something Elise was very much a part of. In order to do that, in order to gain the reputation that you're feared or whatever, you have to upset people. And if you can't upset them, you're powerless. Then you're really just playing pew pew pew. But if you can take something away from them that is meaningful and get them angry, then you become someone either to be feared or loathed or both. And without the ability to disappoint other players, you don't get the kind of combat that makes people want to play meaningfully. Yeah. To play, it's a tug of war, and you want to get your guys, if you have to, up at the middle of the night to do this thing, because if you don't do this thing, you can't disappoint these players. Or you can't defend yourself from being disappointed by these players. It's kind of brutal.
You see this all over EVE, though. It's like you want a response from someone, but how do you get them to respond to you if they don't want to? And on the flip side, you want to have sort of a bit of control over what you're doing in the game. So, the Wormholes Bushido is just, I think, a fantastic system that they've developed around the mechanics that they have, where it's sort of understood that you have to bring a fair amount of people, or we're not going to engage you, because they can choose not to. And you've got this in nullsec as well, where previously you could go in small ships maybe, and people were in barges, and they were, as Caleb would say, assailable. And by assailing them, you would get a response. But if you go in now and someone's in a Rorqual, there's not really too much you can do to harass people into giving you a response. Like, they can ignore you like a mosquito, basically.
Yeah.
You have to escalate quite a bit now to get a response.
I think there's been years of padding and defensive posturing against psychological warfare. I think since the game began. In other words, you basically tell your guys, "Look, we're not that good at this game. Let's just get comfortable with that, and let's not." And this goes into the Bushido thing. Let's not worry about what they say about us. If they say we're not Space Bushido or whatever, doesn't matter. That's not going to affect us. And you condition your guys not to care about that sort of thing. So when those comments come like, "Oh, you're terrible. Look at your fit," or "Look, oh, you're terrible. You just whelped a huge group to a smaller group," those kinds of things are, you're like, "Hey, but we had fun and that was it." And that immunizes you to the pain of being bad at the game or being criticized. I think there's been generations of that.
There's a competitive side to EVE where you want to win, and one of the ways to win is actually content denial, strangely enough, and that's not really a good thing for the game. But you've seen that across the blue balling, as we call it.
The interesting thing thing is that we have collectively a long time ago decided that ISK is basically the most important thing, right? ISK per hour, who's making the most ISK? Oh, don't join that organization because you can join here and make like 3 times as much. And the reason why is because the game itself builds in has a built-in risk system where you need this ISK in order to make ships, and then somebody can take it permanently from you. And so one of the ways to be risk aversive is to just have so much ISK that it doesn't matter. Hashtag already replaced. But the problem with that is that now that you live in a system in which people have figured out that basically there is no scarcity on ISK, there is no scarcity on that kind of progress, then, and if that's the only thing that you don't value owning a specific place of land or beating another group for the sake of it, or like an RVB style pride, or whatever it is that various video games and people give each other as motivation to want to do things. If your only motivation is ISK per hour, if your only way of counting yourself as beating EVE is by making a fortune, then your optimal strategy is to be as safe as possible and make as much ISK as possible. And the thing is that it goes back to that, given the opportunity, a player will engineer the fun out of their own game. Players will find and describe it as if it's positive, that this is the most mind-numbing or a brain-dead way of doing something, because that's the best way to make money, the safest. So we take a game that's full of experiences, that's full of challenges, that's full of different emotional states, and we render it down to, I want to be bored for hours so that way my number will be big.
Dude, you were like a preacher. I'm like, preach it. Yeah. Lux, do you have any thoughts on that? I am speechless.
I mean, I have a very odd view of EVE, where I actually think when you make things in the game harder and more inefficient, it creates opportunity. But it's something that no one's going to welcome. Because you say, on the other hand, if you give me the tools so I can do things more easily, I can provide more content for everyone else. I'm a really dedicated, engaged player. But then the sheer existence of those tools means that a lot of other activities for players will no longer make sense at all for them to do, because there'll be no incentive anymore.
Eve always reminds me of that episode, or that scene in Fifth Element, in which the bad guy is trying to explain why chaos is good. He's like, look at this, like there's nothing going on right here. And then he smashes one thing and he's like, now there's all this life. There's robots coming to clean it up and to make him a new drink and all these different things, right? Like if something's broken, if things are wrong, then there are things to do. One person's inconvenience is another man's opportunity. That's very true.
Sure. And Eve,
Yeah.
that's been true for a long time with all the service corporations that would find a niche, like we'll help you get a pause in high sec. That's something that's very difficult to do, but we can help you do it for a fee. That
Yeah.
kind of stuff exists all over Eve Online.
Well, it's just the balance between what's created and what's destroyed seems like it's quite out of whack. And when you've got it really tilted to one side, the game gets simpler in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have that big like surplus of goods, you have that big buffer. That tilts it as well, even when the ratio is quite balanced. And so when it's tilted that way by a massive surplus, you actually need to have even more destruction than creation to get it back to where it should be.
Yeah, there's a lot of comments in chat. I'm trying to catch up, and I love that they're long comments because it means people are putting some thinking behind their writing, which tells me we have people who are thinkers, rather than just spouting out this, that, and the other. But it takes a minute just to read through it. One of the things I'll point out here is 3P says, Eve can't become so hard that it's a second job. What do you guys think of that?
Well, yeah, in the past, people used to really get burnt out doing some of these tasks because they would try to do them all themselves to minimize trust problems, and they'd get burnt out because they were really hard, like managing POS and the logistics behind refueling them. But that comes down to you have to accept delegating some of that stuff and exposing yourself to some of the trust problems in the game.
Yeah.
But we elect not to do that. We make a choice.
Well, trust, and we can talk about this a different time, but trust is something that it's not trust. Like you can trust somebody, they can betray you. It's that there's no consequences. Like the consequences need to be on that person. They can betray you, they're free to do it, but they've got to live with some more damage than they currently have, because they can escape all sorts of ways from accountability. And that, I think that's where the problem is. As far as like the amount of jobs, when I first started playing, we got evicted from Scalding Pass. I guess everybody starts in Scalding Pass or Providence or Syndicate. We were like a pet of Atlas at the time, and we were just getting wrecked. And I remember the taking down of the pauses, right? You want to save as much infrastructure as you can, and we're clearly being defeated, so we need to save as much as we can. And that's the first time I saw a capital ship. It was a Rorqual. And this is one of the few times where scale really worked, because I was zoomed into my little frigate, and this giant ship comes, literally like casts a shadow on me and then passes behind me. And I was like, what the hell is that? And it was a Rorqual. It was picking up a tower. And those are the kind of jobs that seem menial and tiring and something like that. But I actually had a moment with something that menial, because it was new, but also it was an entry point for someone with less experience. So I think all that stuff has value. I don't think you can imagine yourself as a veteran player enjoying things that you've already done 10, 20 times when there's no stakes behind it either. That just seems like a bad proposition.
So there's a book called Reality is Broken that I wrote, or read rather, that is really good. And what they talk about is kind of like, what is the nature of a game, why we play games, and the difference between how games are structured versus the way that a real world are structured. And one of the things is the concept of satisfaction theory, right? So this is autonomy, mastery, and relatedness. Autonomy, I can make my own decisions. Mastery, I can see the impact of my decisions and see myself gain skill and mastery over time. And purpose, my decisions impact others, either the larger order or for someone else. There's a bigger reason other than myself of what I'm doing. And that last one is the one that we've gotten worse and worse at dealing with in our real world. So for fulfilling work, right? The human mind craves fulfilling work. And in order to have fulfilling work, you have to be able to witness the impact of what you're doing, and you need to be able to have your choice on how you want to do it, right? Is that mastery and purpose again? So the problem is that in our modern world, a lot of our jobs insulate ourselves from that. Either you don't quite, you never quite understood what impact you have within the greater machine. You know, the direct result of your effort may in fact not be obvious to you in a lot of jobs. And so what we're seeing is a lot of an unheard of in previous generations number of people retreating into virtual worlds like World of Warcraft and Eve. And so when people say that Eve is, quote, like a job, what I say is, yes, absolutely. That's the reason why WoW quest grinding works. Like, people seek fulfilling jobs. And when their real life doesn't provide that, they seek it in a video game. So there are lots of people in Eve that are doing it not just because of the ISK, that's just the excuse, but because they know what their impact does, or at least they think about the impact they have either for their organization, for their friends, or even just the idea of like the miner who knows that his minerals are going to be purchased by another player and then used to make something else, and he thinks about that while he's mining. Like, this is not like, I know it sounds like frou-frou stuff, but it is
No.
fundamentally, like, this is fundamental motivation stuff.
Yeah, this is core. This is core to the motivations, and I think you're right on it. I lost my point.
But we've kind of covered that up.
Yeah.
Again, partially because of that risk aversion, right? So there's these systems that are put in place to kind of put pain points on ourselves to kind of warp us psychologically, the risk involved, etc. And so we create these systems to try to protect ourselves from those risks. And again, one of those systems is having enough ISK that risk is no longer meaningful. And so we kind of get confused as to what our goals are. And then we now evaluate our progress based on the standards that we are told to believe in versus the ones that are being inherently fulfilling to us. And eventually the game is no longer giving us that fulfillment that we originally wanted or played it for.
And this is the odd thing. Like, as individuals, we'll always try to gain more self-sufficiency, but actually it erodes one of the most important parts, especially for MMO, which is the fact that the other people rely on you and you rely on them. It's like the glue. And if you can do everything yourself, then you've gotten rid of some of that glue, some of the shared activities. And Eve is really a game of, I think, ults and alt accounts, and it's like the way of winning, especially in a game where trust is a big issue.
Yeah. Well, I keep losing my point because I'm reading comments and I'm like, oh, that's a good point, Mr. Comment Person. And then I was like, what was I thinking? And so it's hard to balance these things out. And there is my inner monologue escaping me again.
I think that there's a certain amount of cynicism. And I think that there's a certain amount of cynicism that's self-defensive. And so in the same way, you know, people push out a narrative, an idea about Eve that matches kind of what their expectations and what their needs are, or more importantly, probably a version of Eve that is more in line with the way they see it and their priority structures, right? So some of what you just said is based on that.
Reflects my priorities, really.
Well, more importantly, it reflects the priorities that people are told over and over and over again until they believe it.
Okay, so yeah, I was going to say, so most of the people playing video games, MMOs especially, these virtual worlds, are what? People who aren't able to get a certain satisfaction in real life, so they're getting it in this virtual life? Is it easier
Yeah,
to
I mean,
compete
so
here?
the idea, like look at WoW questing, right?
Mhm.
Every WoW quest is voluntary, right? It has the exact requirements laid out for you, and its reason for being important is spelled out. And those are the three things that it takes to be fulfilling work. It needs to be, or to be a fun, fulfilling game or whatever. It needs to be voluntary. It needs to have clearly defined needs, and there needs to be a clearly defined reason for it to exist, right? Because if you don't know what you're doing, then it's just confusing and frustrating. If you don't think there's a point to it, then it's not motivating. And if you're not volunteered for it, that's the difference between a job and a game, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you've
Yeah.
decided to take on these responsibilities onto yourself. And that actually does make a difference on how your brain
Oh, it
processes.
makes
Well,
a massive difference.
I have a lot less confidence in humanity than you do because I honestly don't think there's like free will. There's just there's things that we react to and get motivated by. Sometimes there's chemicals that interfere with that process, but essentially we're conditioned to be a pack animal to look for place in society. And these are parts, and when we do it right, then nature rewards us with chemicals that make us happy, and when we are doing it wrong, we become extinct, or that gene pool gets weeded out until you finally get this, what we have now, which is people are conditioned to want to do things. It explains some of the most retarded behavior in real life that you see, not only in civic and public life, but in private life as well. So one of the things that Eve is in a certain way, I think when you start looking at it from a really meta perspective, looking at your own behavior, looking at other people's behavior, all the leaders that are around in some way or another try to figure out, whether they know it or not, how to motivate their guys. They're all experimenting with this stuff too. Which brings me to raising this conversation to the level of analyzing CCP. Something that we talked about yesterday is Eve a laboratory for experimenting with what works and what doesn't work in video games?
This is also what makes it so attractive to the players, is that you can come into a sandbox and you can play. And Ash didn't really touch on that with his explanation, but to me that's the most important thing about Eve. It's a virtual world where you feel free to try things. And so it's not just a test bed for CCP, it's a test bed for all the players to try things as well. That's what makes it attractive.
I definitely agree with that. Although I will also say that I've thought for quite some time that game developers, especially MMO developers, are kind of the new cutting edge of psychology and sociology, right? Because these guys are, in an increasing quantity, are analyzing and evaluating our behaviors, how rewards work, what they can make a small change and monitor what kind of things happen. They can conduct studies on their player bases, and gaming companies across the board are spending lots and lots of time, energy, and money and personnel trying to figure out how better to give people an experience that they want. So yeah, you see a lot of experimentation. I think that honestly, CCP has maybe been overly cautious in the last few years, partially because of being gun shy.
Yep.
From
their players.
From the Summer of Rage.
Yeah, their players. They're scared of their players for a long time. You could tell. It's pretty clear to me that we went from 0 to 100 really fast in like 7-8 years in MMO time. That's great. And then we totally had a flat tire because players held the game ransom, saying, no, we don't want to go that way. We're going this way. It's almost like, and I think at that point, by then already, Hilmar was not really paying attention to EVE Online because he was moving on trying to get other successes spun up, right? Because the video game formula, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashtarothi, is to have a success, but then use the money in that success to build a second success. You're building IPs, and you want to spin those up and hopefully have 2 or 3 games. That was the model of a gaming company. Bungie would have 2 or 3 games that people liked, or BioWare would have like 2 or 3 or 4 games that people liked. That's how you survived. And then came Minecraft or Angry Birds. I forget which one was first. And it seemed like, oh, you can have just one hit, but you take that one hit and you synthesize it to different properties, merchandising, movies, etc. And that
I don't know
was
about that.
That was
I
a different.
think
That was a different model. But what I'm getting to, hold on. But what I'm getting to now is models have changed all over the place, and right now it's not just about what you can provide people, but what people you can provide. In other words, it's looking at masses and how they behave, what they buy, and how you can better sell to them. That's what all these free services that you get out there, like Google, and cheap services like Amazon, and super convenient stuff like Uber and whatever, they're mapping out what works and how many people behave a certain way with this or that. And I wonder why MMOs aren't the same way, or maybe they are.
Well, what Eve realized early on, like a decade before everyone else, was the idea that you can actually get the players to create the content, and they can create far more content and far more diverse content than you can as a game developer. And people are coming to this realization now, other developers are, and so you're seeing more and more like sandbox games now. But Eve was basically
Survival.
like Eve was like the original persistent one shard
Survival
open world
game.
sandbox.
Yeah.
I will say that also is part of the nature of how early of a game it is in the formation of the MMO, because the theme park MMO was very early still in like EverQuest and Asheron's Call, and even to a lesser extent things like Dark Age of Camelot. It wasn't really refined until you got into like the World of Warcraft era, which is after EVE Online. And so EVE actually has almost the luxury of not being beholden to the standards that later MMOs kind of set forth. That being said, the idea of like player created content has always been there. I mean, Heroes Unlimited, Villains Unlimited, or not, what is it? City of Heroes and City of Villains had player built content and whatnot. CCP was just basically one of the earliest companies that, when players stepped dramatically outside of the bounds of their expectations, they responded by saying, "Hey, that's really cool. Let's watch to see what happens," as opposed to a lot of the other video games that attempted to try to rein it in, or in the case of like Ultima Online's environmental system, just scrapped it because it didn't work with the rest of when it actually encountered players. I don't know if you know about that. So Ultima Online originally had a full ecology.
Yeah,
like plants would grow, and then that would attract rabbits, and that would attract wolves, and so there's all these different things. And then the players came in and they just slaughtered everything, and so they eventually had to turn it off because it just didn't work anymore, because they would just kill everything indiscriminately. So then there was no ecosystem.
Oh my God.
So then they just had to create a normal respawn system.
That's so real. But we got off track. The idea that CCP became afraid was based on them having to produce other victories, and they were not having a good time doing that. So they have to keep EVE going because EVE is the moneymaker. And so basically from 2011, when you have a revolt saying, no, we're not going that way, we're going this way, the players kind of said, yeah, we're doing this. And CCP embraced that, saying, hey, we're open to that. We're just the custodians of this place. We're not the pioneers that built it. We're just the guys that monitor it, and all these guys are the actual thing. They're the show. I think Matani walked by Hilmar, and Hilmar at a fan fest way back then, and fan fest, and he told the reporter, he's like, I'm not the most famous guy in EVE Online. He is. And he was saying the players are the most famous people in EVE Online, not the developers of it. And that seems to have completely changed recently, right? Like that whole pathway of let's build a funner game, I think is out the window. And we're looking at what I call the Vikings are back. And they're like, what, let's do this. Let's go forward in this direction. And the ideas that were in the beginning of the game are now back.
Yeah, definitely. They're revisiting the things that just weren't technically feasible 15 years ago.
Right.
But you can see back then that people had these ideas. They dreamed of them, but you couldn't do them. So what you have is many, many compromises and many simplifications.
Yeah, I think the idea is to visit those core concepts. It was so funny because one of the things that I noticed about the Darkness interview for me that stood out right away was not only the feeling that this bulldozer was coming at you with revolvers out, just ready to go. That was Hilmar coming at us saying, I got something I'm going to say. He came in, he was pumped up, he was ready to go. And the second thing was that he was, I think he was asserting this is the second thing. He was asserting, this is how much I know about this. And he just laid it all out. And it was fascinating to hear how deep he thinks about these concepts. Not just him, but everybody, but especially him, since he's at the top. They think of EVE Online in way deeper ways than the players do. And that's not insulting to the players. The players have a certain strata that they're actually getting what they need out of the game. And then you have the people who are analyzing those players to see how they react to things. That's kind of what we do. But then you have, beyond us, the makers of the game who are thinking about all the things because they have to anticipate how people are going to react to certain things in order to make the changes that make the game more popular. And I think that's, if nothing else, Hilmar really showed he knows the core, the bottom, the core of the whole game very, very, very well. And in the time that they were trying to make it an actual video game, they went away from that core. And he's bringing it back to that. That's what I think this whole chaos thing is.
Was it Rise that pointed out it was sort of in maintenance mode and they were just accruing technical debt? And now with someone like Hilmar back, it can give all the game designers confidence to basically design a path and go down it rather than just sort of playing around at the edges of the game.
Well, it was sort of like that. Rise was saying that they had paid technical debt. They were fixing all the crazy stuff that was made in the first 8 years. Five years, actually. They were paying all that down. And he's like, hey, we're at a point now where we can probably accrue some more debt. In other words, take more chances, do some imaginative work that creates new features that are basically hard to expand on because they're so bold and new. That's what development debt is. Well,
I wouldn't go that far, but
I don't think they're going to do that. No, but
no, I mean, I wouldn't go that far as to say that that's what developmental debt is. So I would say that developmental debt is often when you design something in such a way that it will be hard to do it later on. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's something that you want to go after no matter what. But I mean, it is something that you do accept over time.
No, what he was saying was, and this is CCP Rise telling us that, we have paid down a lot of debt. In other words, we've fixed a lot of the game's underpinnings, and now we can actually build some features. And that might cost them some maintenance in the future, but they're willing to do that. In other words, I think there's been a huge correction. People must see it by now. And you only have a correction when things are bad. And that's what people don't recognize. There were people that, like, Eve was hollowed out. A lot of the players that were here that were duking it out, or maybe some of the mid-grade players have been here a little while, but not really long, like not the leaders that you always hear about. Like those guys might have been saying like, besides this money-making progress path that I'm doing, there's not really anything to fight for. So no matter what happened, right? Like, no matter what happened, it always felt like, who cares? That was the big thing. And that was a symptom of it not being hard enough. People not wanting it.
I don't know how much Hilmar watches like everything that people say, or how much it gets back to him.
Probably not this, but
No, yeah, probably not this. But what I'm saying is that when he went out and talked about how he's back in Eve and he's sitting in a wormhole, he's having a good time with that. And you know what? Like, I didn't hear very, very few people were like, man, I can't believe Hilmar's back. It's great. Like, there are a lot of people doubting him. There's a lot of naysaying. Yeah. At best, it was like, oh, well, is that why this is getting fixed? PI gets fixed because CCP Hilmar is now doing it or something like that. That's the best case scenario. And so I almost feel like there's a certain amount of like, no, dude, I do know what I'm talking about. What we are saying is true. Stop naysaying what we're saying. That is because you were saying that Hilmar was kind of trying to show, or was showing his chops, showing that he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Well, that flies directly in the face of a narrative that's kind of built up over the last decade.
They don't know their own.
But game. I got to go drop off my son. I'll be back in a little bit.
Yeah.
Or a few minutes.
All right. We're going to wrap up before you get back, but we'll talk. I think that was a big part of the I don't think he came on to show people like, look how much I know. I don't think that was it. I think he was coming in to say like, we're going to shake things up. That's the impression I got. We're going to shake things up. So, but in doing so, I think he displayed very much how he understands shaking it up in the right ways. So I think there's a lot of people who are saying like they don't know their own game and they don't know how things work. And there's some truth to the way players play it now that have a voice to be able to talk to CCP, right? Like the CSM, they play a certain game this way and they tell CSM, hey, this is how we play the game. I don't know if that's the entirety of the way the game can be played or the motivations of why people play or any of that sort of stuff. I think there's a greater world out there. I think, Lux, you and I talked about this, that there are probably more mission runners than there are people in nullsec.
Yeah, but they're the silent majority for the most part, and so we always tend to focus on the people that are speaking all the time because they're the people that you hear. But there are a great amount of people in high sec. Like it's like more than half.
Yeah,
75%. Would you say?
Yeah, but that isn't a true number because a lot of players who are in nullsec, like you and me, also have characters in high sec. So it's but I think if you look at just you and me as an example, what kinds of players are we? Are we nullsec players or high sec players? What would we consider ourselves?
I think everyone is both, actually, because at the end of the day, there's one Eve and it is all connected together. So when people say, oh, I'm a wormhole, or I'm a nullsec player, or I'm a low-sec player, that's where they mainly play, but everyone is just an Eve player in my mind.
Well, and see, people say like, there's a lot of people in high sec statistically because they're all alts of players who are in nullsec. And I want to reverse that on people saying, maybe the guys in nullsec are actually high sec players who have alts in nullsec, so they can get in on some of those big fights because everybody talks about them or whatever. But really, they spend most of their time doing stuff in high sec where they can play what you call the idle game, which I've been fascinated by ever since. What's the idle game?
It's the best way to describe an idle game is it's incremental. So you click on something and then it progresses, and then the more you click, sort of maybe the better you get at it. And there's lots of little idle games in Eve. Actually, it's it's what means that for a lot of us, even as you get older and you're working, that you can still play it at like some level. Like even when you have very little time. Do you remember the old R&D agents? You could just go in and you could click something and it goes. PI after it's set up, you can just go in. PI is quite nice because it's a flexible idle game, right? So you click it and it goes, and it can go up to a month. It can be
you can
down
speed it
to
up.
a few hours. Yeah, I really like that.
I do too.
It's a nice design.
I thought it is a nice design. I thought it was a model for other things, right? Like you can put something inside of the building process, which right now is just like a set it and forget it kind of process where you bake, basically. You pick the ingredients, you put them together, you stick it in the oven, and you go away for a day or two, and then you come back and you have a pie. But PI is totally different than that. It's if you want to play it actively, you can. If you want to play it passively, you can. And I love that flexibility.
You know what PI is missing? Waste.
Yes.
Waste output.
It was supposed to have it.
It
was supposed to have it when it first started. You were supposed to deteriorate a planet, and so you.
No.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that when I produce robotics, it should produce a secondary product that I then need to deal with, or could
like
deal with.
Like nuclear waste.
Yeah, well, like any productive waste, right? Like it's a useless product to you, but if you then come back, it encourages you to then go through and create a new process to use that that output.
Yeah, and you know what?
Right.
You should take that and put it inside of an industrial and ship it over to your neighbor's lawn and dump it on his lawn, so his stuff is ruined.
Oh my gosh! What if there was like something that if you like dumped it in your enemy's space, it would like lower the ADM?
Yeah, totally. It becomes his problem.
Pollute. Just dump all your pollution into Imperium space.
Now we're talking about reasons to fight.
Well, I loved Hilmer's idea that strip miners should strip resources. So can you imagine the offensive mining fleets?
Yes, exactly.
Just the idea of offensively mining someone's space is hilarious to me.
That valley of grapes that you've cultivated, we're going to come over there and eat it all and take it back to our place and make wine. Sorry. Got to take it.
You log in and the locust fleet has just cleared out your entire region and you're like, God damn you goons.
Yeah, totally. That is something that Hilmar has talked about, is the environmentalism in the game and how that can be used as a conflict driver as well. You go over and you take the resources from your neighbor. Of course, like Romans, you didn't want, even if you were a Roman citizen, you didn't want their army going through your town because they would just tear it up. They would take the resources.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of cases of that historically when there was like a friendly military unit, but they left them in a town for too long. And it's just like, well, we're hungry and they have food.
Yeah. Yeah, they would just tear it up. They dig all over the place to make themselves fortified, and the whole place would be messed up when they left. And it's like, God, with friends like this, who needs enemies?
Caleb's in here.
I do believe that, like, I do believe in general, like in Eve, the more you're built up in Nullsec, the better your resources are in that area, which doesn't make any sense to me. I would think that the more city it would be, the less pirates and the less good mining there would be, and that you have to brave into the unprotected areas in order to get to the best rocks and the best, coolest pirate strongholds.
I think Lux and Caleb did a lot of work on this. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say a very short remark to the whole soldiers in areas for too long. This is where the Latin word raptus come from, and you can figure out what that actually relates to directly as well.
Yeah, nice, Caleb.
Oh, RAP. That's horrible.
It's raptors. It means to seize. It means to steal and to take something, especially the Roman legal term, which is usually what happened when Roman soldiers stayed in an area for too long.
I think historically in some of the writings, or not, maybe it was just a Monty Python movie.
Monty Python is very much related to historical historical writing.
It
trust
totally
me on
is. It totally is. And I think one of the characters is like, oh, I think it's Life of Brian. Brian's basically like, oh, his father was some Roman centurion back there somewhere. And I think that talks about rapture and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then of course the funny part is that it's the Greek word for the rapture is a different root altogether. So
Wow. Right. Well, we were just talking about how Hilmar really proved he knew a lot about the core psychology of the game.
oh yeah, and Ash was fixing my mood yesterday, and we pretty much fixed the game.
You did? Let's hear it. I got 15 minutes. I'm going to step off so I can get ready for my day, but I'm going to keep this stream going, so hang around.
Procedural generation stuff and NPCs killing NPC stations and getting structures and settling space. You have to clear them when you actually want to live in the space.
Yeah, so step 1 is what we see right now. Step 2 is the drifters takes off. Step 3 is the drifters destroy the current infrastructure for the pirate faction. Step 4, pirate factions now get drifter AI. Step 5, everything's fighting over everything.
Yeah, basically, Eve will be alive. So rather than having all the static PvE systems, they'll be responsive to what the players do. So it's not really about the PvE controlling the players, it's more like the world will respond to you.
And especially because it's back to the whole balancing of things like barrier of entry and getting a grip on into nullsec and building out your own space. When we have an NPC behavior like this, then the behavior is growing, right? It's stages. So it takes them time to actually get the foothold, get in there, build the things, expand the things, and you will need to do more and more cleaning of NPCs to actually take it over if it's been left for too long.
And when NPCs glass a region, they actually can prepare it for the next player group to come. That might be a little extreme.
You're talking when Hilma goes in and goes, these NPCs are not building and progressing fast enough. Turn it up to 10, and then suddenly you have the same effect as if the NPCs in an RTS is set to like ultra hard difficulty, and they just produce everything 10 times faster than you and glass you. A little bit similar to what happened with Drifters, right?
So there's two things that I think about the drifter tax. One, I think it was all a test and data collection for whatever it is to come. And two, the thing that struck me the most interesting about the way that CCP describes the drifter attacks, so I think it was Hilmar that said that the drifters decided where to attack, which meant even on a high level that was AI controlled, which makes me even more curious as to what exactly they were testing.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, because I heard, of course, word of mouth, anecdotally, and tinfoil hattery that it was pretty much supposed to be a live event that was overpowered, right? That they turned the knob up too high.
Well, I don't think that those are mutually exclusive statements. I mean, I think that it was a live event that was designed to test this AI's attacking decision process. Because if you think about it, so Invasions has a very similar mechanic in the fact that it has a lot of potential systems, but then there's some algorithm or something that decides which of those potential systems it will strike at any given time. And so I think that the drifters were kind of testing another more aggressive version of that, and it ended up being too much for a couple of reasons. And if you think about it, the reasons why it was too much are probably ones that they didn't quite anticipate. Like they may not have realized how big of a deal it was that they weren't on D-scan, or various other things. There are some of the other little bugs, the fact that they can hit from such a far range. Like there's a couple of things that made it so that it was less pleasant than it could have been and felt even more overpowered than it would have been otherwise.
The effect was a complete shit show. Seriously, the fact that you suddenly had to man these things 24/7 because CCP bots are allowed and they never sleep, just like real bots.
Well, I mean, I can't stress enough how much one of the leading theories about these things is that they are bots. So, I mean, that's very consistent with what you would expect from them.
I
That's
think
part of
the
the
point.
challenge.
I think the point is what you're going for is an ecosystem that responds to players, and the exact thing you don't want is like the Drifter event, which is like oppressive and not interesting at all, and doesn't really respond to the players at all. You can't stop it. You can't do anything about it, really.
Well, as I've said before, I don't think the Drifter event was ever. I mean, like it's nowhere. It was at no point was I confused that it was an end state. It was shock and awe, get everyone's attention, and get everybody focused on it. Prior to this, the Drifters had been sitting around for 3 years, and everybody had basically lost all respect for them. So if they're going to do something bigger with them later, then it's important to kind of bring focus that, hey, this is the kind of things that are going to be important. It's the same as the Drifter wormholes, right? Like it really seems like CCP is making sure that we know that these things exist, that how they work, and get us familiar with them. And I believe it's because they will it will increase in their importance soon.
Yeah, that could be it. That could just be about getting our attention, but the timing and the manner in which they did it.
Again, I think that they expected like an 8 and got a 12, but that doesn't mean that they didn't mean to do it.
No,
I just don't have words.
Doug is trolling you, Ash. He wants to give you the sausage factory experience.
I'll just watch his head explode.
I think I missed something.
He just said, I kind of want to elect Ash to the CSM so I can be there when all is revealed to him.
Oh, jeez.
I think that's very much related to when the Mitani was talking about watching Jintan's video about what happens to people when they've been on the CSM for too long.
No kidding. So, I also want to stress something now that we've talked about the CSM and Eve at home and all that stuff. I want to remind everybody that CCP is a game company, and the game is their product, which means communications about the game is also part of that product. And the point of the product is to create certain experiences and emotional impacts on their customers. That's why we play. And so all aspects of the product needs to play into that. This goes back to like other video games that have clunky controls in order to make you feel like you're powerless, or have advertisements that set you up for like what the game is actually going to be about on like a different level than what you expect. So what I caution you guys about is anything that the CSM sees, anything that we see, it's all decided, and it all plays into the narrative that CCP wants us to see and to experience. So even though that the CSM is behind an NDA, that doesn't mean that what they see isn't very carefully curated and could be for a purpose, because it's all designed to create an experience for us collectively. So if CCP doesn't want us to know, they're not going to tell us, is what I'm trying to say.
Sounds like a lot of tinfoil to me, Ash.
A little bit. I just think that CCP is missing the opportunity to go down the route that Lux and I have been talking about, pretty much making Eve a Facebook/Sue where people pay to see us do weird shit. So we become the product.
I mean, it's not a horrible
monkeys
idea.
in a zoo, Caleb.
Yeah, that's why I said Sue because sociologists would actually like to see how we behave. Psychologists could. This is you know all those MK Ultra experiments they did in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? They could just do that in Eve as like this sandbox where psychologists can poke us with sticks and electrocute us and abuse us and we become the product.
I think that's happening in the MMO world more than people properly respect.
Yeah,
But
it does.
just to say, I'm not saying that's tinfoil. That is a very common game design practice. And the short of it is that if CCP wants a chaos era, they're not going to be in game going chaos era and then out of game being like, here's all the information. Like that doesn't actually create a chaos era because we're not our characters. So if they want to make this thing, it has to be like the communication external has to reinforce what they want us to feel internally.
Well, this just reminds me of what they do with interest rates. Sometimes all they have to do is announce that they're thinking about putting them up, and that can have the desired effect.
Well, look at what Goonswarm does.
That relates to Nick Bison's comment, and the reason is that in Eve, the CSM is supposed to be the advisory and quality assurance before fact, whereas it seems as if CCP has actually forgotten to create a red team that can actually test and shoot down ideas internally. So instead, they've outsourced that job to goons and other players in general. So we are the ones that are supposed to break the game to show them that something is wrong. Did I mic drop?
No, well, so your point is that we find the things that are wrong because they don't see it?
The point is that even when we warn CCP via the CSM that something is wrong, like let's take the obvious example of the raw crawl. The whole CSM said this is a bad design, this is a bad idea. If you introduce it like this, it's going to break the game. Lo and behold, they introduced it. We used it to break the game. Now the game is broken. We've basically had the live version and operating as a red team in the live version. It should have been stopped in design and brainstorming features, right? But it wasn't. So this is what we always do. When whether we're talking about infinite cannons or infinite moon goo that you get even though you don't actually have anything extracting from it, because bugs exist, and even though we report them, they can go on forever and ever until they become a problem, right? A noticeable and major problem, right? The free moon goo was operating for at least 2 years, as far as I remember. And it's only when goons and similar groups of that size go full on and abuse it and exploit it to the hill, and then CCP comes in and says, "Okay, this is broken. We better fix it."
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna respond to that last point first. So this goes back to the statement about technical debt, right? So those kinds of issues are the manifestation of technical debt. Technical debt is like, I'm going to build this thing and I'm going to build it based on these assumptions, and maybe I'm going to cut a couple corners because I've got a deadline. And so now somebody else will someday have to come back through this and clean it up. That is technical debt, right? So if there's a bug in the system that isn't being cleaned up, it's probably because either they don't know how to solve it because of how it was originally designed, or it's taking up too much man hours / it's not allocated as a high priority because it isn't doing very much damage. And that's because of the high amount of technical debt Eve has. It's like, yes, that's a bug, but is it as bad as the FOF missile bug in wormhole space, or this other bug, or the, whatever bug you want to, it happens to be the thing that you're upset about. They can only work on so many bugs at once, and bugs are far, far, far more risky to work on than features. What?
The example is this recent one that's getting fixed now. The one about knowing on grid where someone is warping to before they actually start warping.
Right.
Because the server gives you that information. The point is that feature, or rather bug, if I'm not mistaken, and I consulted one of my friends that actually had intimate information on the code, it's actually way back to like 2004-ish from day one. It's always been like that, which means that fundamentally the bots have been able to be coded to abuse this system since forever.
Right, but again, they can't fix something unless they A, can identify it, B, can determine what assumption is causing it, and B, be able to correct the assumption. Like those three things need to happen to fix any given bug. And given the fact that it only became public awareness like within the last month, I would say that A probably was a big problem for a while.
All right. I'm back, guys. What did we talk about?
We're talking about
no, it's all right.
bugs.
I'll go listen. I'll go
Technical
listen
debt
to
and developmental
okay.
And
planning. I don't know.
Also, the way that CCP responds to basically the designs they make that are exploitable. And as we've seen in the past, sometimes they don't necessarily listen to the feedback that there's going to be a problem. So what the players do is they go and they actually exploit it until it becomes such a problem that it can't be ignored. They basically demonstrate what the problem is.
This is actually not atypical. I do want to respond to the other thing about this whole nonsense, which is I keep hearing, we told CCP about X and we're right. CCP never listens to us. And the problem with that argument is that if you just say we said X and we were right, you're missing the time that somebody said Y, Z, F, Q. Some of them were wrong. Some of them directly contradicted what you said. You know what I mean? So like if you just say we said this and we're right, CCP doesn't listen, how stupid are they? Do you know how many different things they are told by the player base with authority and on any given topic?
And how many times have they been wrong?
Yeah. So just that argument alone is not good enough.
I'd like to just do a shout out to Ixuki because I didn't know much about Ixuki and I didn't actually vote for him or anything. But the way he presented shit the other night was amazing, and I would definitely vote for that guy again. When he was pointing out that one of the most important things about the CSM, and when you're trying to point these things out or argue something with CCP, is to make sure that you do it clearly enough and simply enough for them to actually understand what it is you're trying to address. So the communication actually reaches the other side of the table. Because if you're just going, oh, Titans are OP, what do you mean? You need to explain yourself. You need to give examples. You need to show why it's broken, prove it, and then argue why or how that might be solved, right? Just screaming the sky is falling is not very useful at the CSM, right? Or in any case when talking to CCP, because if you're agreeing, they're just going to ignore you.
Or any game company, for that matter.
Not even game companies, and just in general. But
yeah,
I just liked him doing that, showing that that's the point of the CSM. This is what we need to get better at, also from players to our CSM representatives, because they can't go with half a story. Because it's not going to get through, and it's also why when we discuss things that are a little bit complicated, it might actually take a little bit more work to actually come up with a way of explaining it and presenting it to CCP, because they might actually not even know that this is even remotely an issue.
Speaking of stories, I think Matterall has something to say. Right?
Yeah, we're done. Got to shut down, take off. But you want to talk about these things and more, you can find these guys hanging around here and in their own Discords, but you can find them hanging around here too. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Oh, we just got a tip. That's nice. We'll be back tomorrow and every day this week.
That's a cup of coffee.
Yes. Next time we'll bring coffee. Thanks for watching. We will actually, if you can hang out for just a second, we're going to see if there's anybody to raid, because we want to be generous to both you and people who are streaming, go through the trouble of streaming. So we'll dump you off somewhere where you can continue to watch EVE Online. The only problem is it's hard to find people that we know, and I don't want to dump you into a bad situation. Like
It couldn't be worse than our stream, let's be honest, Maduro.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, people come here for different reasons, right? I could dump him onto. Oh, I don't see. You guys have recommendations? I don't see anyone.
I would say Rushlock is, well, maybe.
Yeah, Rushlock's who I would consider. All right.
Extra Squishy is always entertaining if you enjoy watching that. So is
That's true.
Yeah.
Where's Extra Squishy?
He's first XTRA. He's got like an X, black X, or black background, white X icon. Top row.
We'll do that for a change. All right, guys, hang out. We'll try to transfer you over to them with the raid. Let's see how that goes. Uh-oh, it's Ed for mature audiences.
He's Australian, I think.
Well, that explains that. Just kidding.
Shots fired.
No. When they say it, it's fine. It's when other people say what they say. Anyway.
All right, I'm heading into Public Voice 1 that way.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks. See you next time.